Dragon Quest is a series of Japanese RPGs that I have loved for a long time, so when it did come to Smash Ultimate, I was through the roof with joy. This is a huge step forward for not only Dragon Quest itself, but for JRPGs as well. Let's take a step back and talk a little bit about Dragon Quest's history, and then why its inclusion into Smash Ultimate is extremely important for its future. The first Dragon Quest game, which back then was known as Dragon Warrior, was released on May 27, 1986 on the Nintendo Entertainment System, with the main creator being Yuji Horii, the artist being Akira Toriyama, and the composer for the music being Koichi Sugiyama, with Akira Toriyama already being well known for his art in Dragon Ball, and would later go on to make the art for other similar games like Chrono Trigger in 1995. This is also why a lot of Dragon Quest characters look like they're from Dragon Ball, because it's the same artist. Oh, I get it now. So this is where Akira Toriyama originally got the inspiration for Super Saiyan Blue Goku. That makes so much more sense. Anyways, from this point on, I'll refer to this series as Dragon Quest to avoid any confusion. Just know that they're the same franchise. It was named Dragon Warrior in the West initially due to the fact that a pen and paper series of RPGs already had the name, so Square changed it out of fear of a lawsuit, but they eventually changed the name back when it fell through. Dragon Quest is a standard JRPG series with turn-based gameplay. In fact, it was one of, if not the, founding fathers of JRPGs, and the fact that it predated Final Fantasy by more than a year, with that being released at the tail end of 1987. It created the basic framework, inspirations, concepts, and gameplay mechanics for the genre as a whole, like having menu systems, turn-based battles, and the classic silent protagonist trope that the genre has become all too famous for. However, in the past, Square Enix has not been on top of localizing Dragon Quest games for Western audiences, like America and Europe, with the older Dragon Quest games, and by that I mean the Super Famicom versions of them, staying in Japan. This was primarily due to localization issues due to the fact that Dragon Quest games were not well received in the West at the time, which is probably why Dragon Quest V and Dragon Quest VI did not have their original SNES versions localized. It also didn't help that there was already another quite well-known JRPG series in the form of Final Fantasy, which overshadowed Dragon Quest's presence in the West due to it being seen as more appealing to Westerners at the time. For a while, it seemed like fans were just going to have to stick with fan-translated ROMs of Dragon Quest games because of the lack of an official English translation, and that seemed like the end of it. But that all changed when, on November 15th, 2005, Dragon Quest VIII Journey of the Cursed King was released on the PlayStation 2 in the West. Sony had also previously helped Square release the original version of Dragon Quest VII on the PS1 fully translated in English, but this was the first time where Dragon Quest had made a sizable impression outside of Japan. One of the possible reasons as to why Dragon Quest VIII was such a success in the West was due to it being bundled as a demo disc with Final Fantasy XII. A few years after Dragon Quest VIII's surprisingly successful release in the West, Square Enix finally decided to localize more Dragon Quest games, with the help of Nintendo this time around, starting with the DS remake of Dragon Quest IV, Chapters of the Chosen, released to America on September 16, 2008, and other Western countries at similar time periods in 2008. This marks the point where Dragon Quest would stay for quite a while, and would bring all of its mainline titles to Nintendo handheld platforms. Sadly, even with the help of Nintendo, and the eventual official translation of the Dragon Quest VII remake for the 3DS, one of the most text and content-heavy entries in the entire series, Square still had issues with fully localizing a few of the Dragon Quest spin-off games. Take the Dragon Quest Monsters series, for example. One of the first unreleased DQM games outside of Japan was DQM Caravan Hearts. However, this was a Game Boy Advance game, and before Nintendo really started helping Square. It should also be noted that DQM Caravan Heart was a prequel to DQ7, with Prince Kiefer as a main character, one of your party members from DQ7. Thankfully, both Dragon Quest Monsters Joker 1 and 2 released outside of Japan, and Dragon Quest fans in the West were extremely happy, at least those that did get to play them, as these spin-off games were quite fantastic. I should also mention that Dragon Quest Monsters Joker was my first entry that I got to play in the Dragon Quest series, and I absolutely loved it for how unique it was.
Come on, let me do it. I can cast the spell.
Pipe down, will ya? I don't think a spell is gonna work on this one.
For a quick summary, it's a monster collecting game that's more in depth and more about breeding new monsters by fusing two monsters together to create a new one, which is called synthesis in the games. You could also have 3 different monsters out at any given time, which added strategy to how you went about battle. As a final note on gameplay for Dragon Quest monsters, to add even more fun to the mix, DQMJ2 and the later games would add bigger monsters that took up 2 or more of your party slots, but had unique skills and abilities, and would hit pretty hard in some cases to make up for the cost of additional party slots. I'd go more in depth about these games, but I'd be here all day if I were to do that, so go check out some of their wikis on the various kinds of monsters in DQM games that you can find if I piqued your interest. Unfortunately, it seems that Square's bad habits of not releasing some Dragon Quest games outside of Japan die hard, as the professional version of DQMJ2, the remake of DQM2 for the 3DS, Dragon Quest Monsters Terry's Wonderland for the 3DS also, and the base and pro versions of DQMJ3 would never see a release outside of Japan. In case you're wondering what these professional versions are, think of them as expanded versions of the original games, with added story, cutscenes, just more content in general, and new monsters for you to go out and collect. Unless we get a Switch port of some of these games, me personally, I would love ports of Terry's Wonderland and DQMJ3 Pro. It is unlikely that we'll ever see any of these games set foot officially outside of Japan, which is a shame because they're all great entries into the franchise. Now you might be thinking to yourself, well, this is great and all, but how does this relate to the significance of Dragon Quest being in Smash? Well, person who's watching this video, I'm glad you thought of that, because in order to understand this even more, we'll need to look at another once obscure and not well-known franchise that worked its way into being a well-respected icon of gaming, Fire Emblem. Fire Emblem, much like Dragon Quest, started out as a niche franchise that not many were aware of outside of Japan, also not seeing very many, if not at all, fully translated releases until, you guessed it, 2 of their main characters, that being Marth and Roy, made their way into Super Smash Bros. Melee on December 3rd, 2001. This single event kickstarted an interest in the Fire Emblem series that has caused it to become one of Nintendo's greatest heavy hitters yet, and has made it seen a ton of mainline releases. From the original Fire Emblem we got on the Game Boy Advance on April 25th, 2003, to the 2 GameCube Fire Emblem games, heck, Fire Emblem even has a popular mobile game spin-off in the form of Fire Emblem Heroes nowadays, and then we go all the way up to the present day, with the soon-to-be-released Fire Emblem 3 Houses on July 26th, 2019 for the Nintendo Switch. Now, call me crazy, but I believe that the exact same thing is happening with Dragon Quest, now that it has representation in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. People will be more interested in Dragon Quest as a whole and want to play more of its games, and hopefully we'll get more English versions of Dragon Quest games now on as a result of that curiosity. Games that were previously thought to be only a fever dream in terms of localization are now fully on the table and a possibility. There's also the fact that the most recent game in the Dragon Quest franchise, Dragon Quest XI, sold extremely well in the West. US video game industry analyst Matt Piscatella had this to say about it on Twitter. Some folks asking about Dragon Quest XI. It was the biggest launch month in franchise history, with dollar sales more than double the previous best, Dragon Quest IX. This news, combined with the PC port of DQ11 having a glowing review score on Steam, and the upcoming definitive edition for the Nintendo Switch in fall 2019, paints a brighter picture than ever before for the Dragon Quest series in the West. So, I hope that now that you've watched this video, if you've already played some Dragon Quest games, you can even further appreciate its inclusion in Smash, and the bright future of this JRPG series outside of Japan. If you're new to this series, I hope you can now be more respectful to Dragon Quest than some of these other people on Twitter. I will not display names out of respect for privacy. But to put it simply, as some people would say, hoes mad. Man, this one was a doozy to make. But with all that being said, I have to give a big thanks to some of the guys over at the Dragon Quest Discord server for doing some fact-checking for me, because I wanted my work to be as thorough and high quality as possible. I hope you all enjoyed today's video. Don't forget to like and subscribe because that helps me out a ton in growing my YouTube channel. And I hope you have a great day. See you next time! Oh, and sources for the footage clips in this video will be in the description below. Now I'll see you all next time.